not maybe, let's examine our hearts in light of God's word. Now I'm going to begin by reading one verse to you. It's Genesis 32:27. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. Now, this narrative begins in chapter 25 with Jacob's deceit. And these are the kinds of stories that we've heard across the years. If you've been in Sunday school, this begins, and we'll begin looking at verse 28 in chapter 25. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. That's the very definition of a dysfunctional family, right? I understand them. And Jacob sawed pottage. That means he started cooking soup. Esau came from the field, and he was faint. Remember, these are people in a dysfunctional family. They're basically young adults now. And watch what happens. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom, which means red. Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And now it's coming to the forefront very quickly. Because you see, while Esau and Jacob were born twins, Esau was actually the one that was born first. And so that made him the elder brother. And to the eldest child went the birthright. That meant that everything that belonged to the father, not so much talking about money or even goods, but the respect and as the head of the family and kind of as a ruler, because that was how things functioned in that day, belonged to Esau. Jacob's saying, you want some of my soup? I'll sell it to you for your birthright. Now, Esau said in verse 32, Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob, I just move on past that. Because obviously, if he just walked in from the field, he probably wasn't going to die. Sorry, I still haven't. Take off a Sunday and forget what I'm supposed to do. And Jacob said, Swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So that place of leadership within the family, within the home, that was his because he was the eldest, he let go of it, and it says that he despised or scorned his birthright. It meant nothing to him. So we're still talking, and this is important to where we're headed. We're talking about Jacob's deceit. Now, the oldest son would receive the birthright. That meant that he was in charge of the family, right? And now we've read how Esau despised that and literally sold it for a bowl of soup. You thought Olive Garden was expensive. But it doesn't stop there. Over in chapter 27, and the other thing that was the assumed right of the oldest was this blessing that he would receive from his father. Now understand that this is especially powerful because Esau was the oldest, but he was also his father's favorite. While Jacob, who's deceitful, he'd already gotten the birthright, was his mother's favorite. Here they are, 2 against 2, right in their own home. Mother against father, brother against brother. And so we find in chapter 27, and it came to pass that when Isaac was old, and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his eldest son, and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold, now I am old. I know not the day of my death. Now therefore take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver, and thy bow, and go out to the field. Take me some venison, and make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. And Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son. And Esau went to the field to hunt for venison and to bring it. Now, watch what happens. Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, and saying, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison and make me savory meat, that I may eat and bless thee before the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command me. Now these are instructions from Rebekah to Jacob. And this is what she says to him. She conspires, I was going to say she conspires with. In reality, she came up with the plan and told Jacob what to do. She said, go out, kill a goat, make the meat. He's not going to know the difference. And you take it in, he can't see, and you tell him that you're Esau, and you'll not only have the birthright, but you'll have that special blessing that's reserved for the eldest son. And Jacob says, but. And so we know that these guys weren't identical twins because he says, I'm smooth. And Esau is hairy. And she said, it still astonishes me that this worked. She said, we'll cut some of the skin of the goat, wrap it around your arms and your hand, put it on your hands, and when he wants to feel you, he can feel the goat's hair, and he'll think it's Esau. Now, it sounds crazy, but it worked. And so while Esau is gone, Jacob comes in and into his father's room, and now he's made some meat, and he says, here's your meat, bless me now, my father. All the way down to verse 24 now in chapter 27. Isaac says, Art thou my very son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, Bring it near to me, that's the meat, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee. And he brought it near to him. And he did eat, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said unto him, Come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his raiment, and blessed him, and said, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord hath blessed. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. And he goes on with this blessing that let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. That's a pretty strong blessing that he's reserved just for his one favorite son. But what he doesn't know is that he's actually blessing the one that's not his favorite. He's been tricked. So what happens then? Well, Esau comes in from the field, and he has gotten a deer, apparently, or something like that. And he's brought it in. I can just see him. This big, he's kind of a manly man with his meat over his shoulder, whatever it may be that he had killed. And he goes in, and now they lived in tents, I'm pretty sure. So the
kitchen tent is empty. And he goes in there and he begins to prepare that meat and brings it to his father. And he says, I've done what you told me. Now bless me. And Isaac says, who art thou? Verse 32, and he said, I am thy son, thy firstborn Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly and said, who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it to me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and blessed him. Yea, and he shall be blessed. Now the key to understanding what's happening here is that in their culture, they wouldn't take that back. So Esau couldn't, he tried. He said, well, bless me too. And he said, I can't give you that blessing. I already gave it to your brother. And any blessing that's going to come from me to you will now be secondary. And that's why it says that Isaac trembled very exceedingly and said, who, where is he that hath taken venison? And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry and said unto his father, bless me even also, O my father. And he said, thy brother came with subtlety and hath taken away thy blessing. Listen to this verse, okay, because this is where I'm headed. And he said, is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He hath took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered and said unto Esau, behold, I have made him thy lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him, and what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And Esau said unto his father, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father. And Esau lifted up his voice, and he wept. I'm talking about Jacob's deceit, how he stole, really, or got for himself ill-gotten gains that were very, very important. The birthright that belonged to the elder brother, and now the blessing. And Esau says, is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. That word supplanted, and Jacob means, by the way, that's kind of it is the meaning of the word, the name Jacob is supplanter. And if we were to look at that same verse, well, let's go back to verse 35. Isaac said, and this is the Amplified, your brother came deceitfully and has fraudulently taken away your blessing for himself. Esau replied, is he not rightly named Jacob, the supplanter? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. And it goes on, he took away my birthright, he has taken away my blessing, and you've not reserved a blessing for me. It's a pretty ugly story, isn't it? Now, given who Esau is, who really has no depth of insight. He lives on a very shallow level. And that's shown by the part of the story that we read where he said, what good does it do me to have this birthright? I'm going to die if I don't have soup. Well, he probably could have cooked his own food because we see here that he did. He was able. But he wants what he wants, and he wants it now. And that's how he lived. On the other hand, we don't get to say, here's a guy who lives a shallow life, and here's a guy who lives a good life. Nope. These are 2 brothers. One is very shallow, and one is very deceitful. And so the deceitful one has now tricked the shallow one out of basically everything that was his as the older brother. And Esau's mad. Surprise. Made him very, very angry. And so we can go down to verse 41 in chapter 27, where it says, and Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father at hand, then will I slay my brother Jacob. He wasn't going to kill his brother while his father was alive, and he wasn't going to kill his brother while they were going through the process of having a funeral. But he knew in his heart this is probably about as far ahead as he ever thought. He thought, but when that time has passed, he hated his own brother, his own twin brother, so badly that he had plotted in his heart to murder him. Verse 42, and these words of Esau, now we're talking about Rebekah. These words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah, and she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, said unto him, Behold, thy brother Esau, as touching thee, doth comfort himself, purposing to kill thee. There's some news you'd like to hear. Now therefore, my son, she says, obey my voice, and arise, flee thou to Laban my brother, to Haran, and tarry with him a few days until thy brother's fury turn away. So that's what Jacob did. And I'm not going to, we've covered quite a bit of ground in Genesis here. But Jacob took off. He had to leave right now. Pack it up and go. And at Bethel, which means house of God, there really was nothing there, but that was where he landed, and he had a pillow for a stone, and he had a dream in the night, and he saw angels on a staircase coming up and down from heaven, and God told him this will be the house of God, and it was in the history of the Israelites. So it was hundreds of years later that Bethel was established as the house of God. But he had a crisis, and he met God in his crisis, and God ministered to him, and yet Jacob was not changed. And he went to Haran, and he met with Laban, his uncle, and his uncle had a beautiful daughter. I know, but in those days they married cousins, okay? And so that's really what it came down to. He saw Rebekah and fell in love with her. Rachel. He saw Rachel and fell in love with her. And that was kind of the first direction he went with Laban. And he said, I want to marry Rachel. Now, Rachel had an older sister, Leah. And so Jacob worked for 7 years with the promise that at the end of 7 years he would marry Laban's daughter, Rachel. And so 7 years passed, wedding night came, and he actually wound up married to Leah, which did not make him happy. So he went to Laban and said, you tricked me. Imagine that. He's learning his lesson, isn't he? But he's still the deceiver. He's still the supplanter. That's still who he is. And so he served 7 more years, and he's finally married to the woman of his dreams, Rachel. But now this is life. 2 wives. Dysfunctional family again, by the way. Imagine that. If you had 2 wives, anyhow. There was much competition in that home. So in reality, nothing had changed from the family in which he grew up to the family that he was creating. And so he served his father-in-law, and we're going to find, we can see it here in just a minute, in chapter 31, verse 41, also in verse 7, he says, 10 times Laban changed his wages. So this is what I want you to think about just for a moment. This is not necessarily the whole message, but it's part of it. That this is a deceiver in a family of deceivers. And then finally, and he became a wealthy man. And he went to his father-in-law and he said, the spotted animals, so we're talking probably sheep and cattle and goats, and the ones that are born spotted, or and the scripture says ring-straked, so they would be they wouldn't be a solid color. Basically, the ones that are basically not perfect, I'm going to take them and they'll be mine. That'll be my wages. And his father-in-law said, okay. And then we read how he goes and he takes sticks and he like carved them so that they looked kind of like Brother John's cane right there. And everybody looked, good job. It had rings on it, basically. And put them in front of the animals while they drank and ate, and they had more of these spotted and ring-straked animals. This matters because Jacob is still deceiving. He's trying to work things in his favor. And he thinks that by doing that, he actually became a rich man. Now, what he'll realize, and we can see later, is that it was God at work that caused those things to happen that way. But Jacob has been deceived by his father-in-law and his wives and his wages, and then he has children. There's competition in his home. Really what happens is he winds up with 4 wives, or I don't know how you'd say it, 2 wives and 2 sub-wives, something like that. 12 children, eventually. But with all of the conflict in the home and with his father-in-law, he decides it's time, and with God's help, to go back home, to his home, because that's where God wants him, in Canaan, not in Haran. God had already brought those people through that area, and it was a temporary return, and they were going back. And so we find in chapter 32 where they are returning. And just, I want to say this, because we find Rachel stole her father's idols. Now, we could talk about what that means, because it too has something to do with the descent of power and authority within a family. But this is what I really want us to notice, that she deceived her father when he found they were gone, and he chased them down and said, "Who stole my idols?" And they said, "We don't have them." And he searches, and Rachel is favored, okay? And she deceives her father and basically sits over them and won't get up, and he lets her do it, and there's more deception. That's my point. So now we get to chapter 32, verse 1, and Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when he saw them, he said, "This is God's host," and called the name of that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau's brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he gives them instructions to go to his brother humbly and express his desire to reconcile. And it's been decades now, right? And Esau is receptive. And so Jacob has a plan to meet his brother the next day. And he's going to offer him all kinds of animals as a gift. He's going to put his whole family in front of him. And he has it all worked out, how this parade's going to come and meet his brother, and hopefully his brother will have mercy on him. And then the sun goes down. It's night. Verse 22 of chapter 32. And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons, passed over the ford Jabbok, and he took them and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had, and Jacob was left alone. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. Jacob is known by what his name calls him. He's a deceiver. He's a supplanter. He's always working his angles. God had met him on the way when he was running from his brother at Bethel. Now he's coming back. He's met God, but tonight he's going to wrestle with God. Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he had prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What do you suppose the blessing was, by the way, that he was seeking? I don't know. Probably not the one he's about to get. And the angel of God said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. We meet people and they introduce themselves and they give their name and you give your name. That's not what's happening here. Really what the angel of the Lord that with whom he was wrestling was saying is, who are you? Or better yet, to help us understand it, what are you? I don't know what that wrestling all night looked like. I don't know if Jacob, as he wrestled, was talking with that form of a man that he didn't understand. And that angel of the Lord would say, just remind him, remember how you deceived your brother? Are you a deceiver? And he began to answer the questions maybe correctly, because then it came down to this question. And by the way, this wasn't just a physical battle. This is clearly spiritual. And he says, what is your name? And he says, I am Jacob. I am a deceiver. I am the supplanter. I have lived my whole life this way. I have come from a dysfunctional family, and now I have a dysfunctional family. Always trying to get the leg up on the other person. And I'm the one who's led this. He said, I am. Another meaning of Jacob is heel grasper. I'm going to skip a lot of this. We go back to chapter 32 then in verses 22 through 28. We find the next verse says, and he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob. It'll be Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. Jacob asked this question, then he said, so what is your name? The angel of the Lord said, you don't need to know my name, but here's your blessing. Because you're no longer going to be called Jacob, I'm giving you a new name. You're no longer the deceiver, the supplanter, the heel grasper. But your name is Israel, which means you have power with God and with men. Let me ask you to consider this question within yourself this morning. What is your name? Not the name that your mother gave you necessarily, but deep within, it's really a question of who are you and what are you? What would God call you if he were to name you? We read in Scripture where Jesus told Peter, and he named him. Said, you are Petra, you are a rock. Peter wasn't a rock, was he? I've just been reading this week how Peter, now, I think we should give him credit. He was in a very difficult place, and while apparently it was John who was able to get him into into the palace of the high priest when Jesus was there. He was trying to lie low, and he denied knowing Jesus or being a follower of him. Jesus had said, "No, you're a rock, and on this rock will I build my church." We might say, well, my name might be unstable. My name might be, and we can fill it in because we can know some things in our heart. And we might even say, but I'm no longer going to be that. But it takes more than that. Jacob wrestled with God, or the angel of the Lord. And it says that he had power with man and with God. But that power wasn't because he gained it. It was because God gave it to him. It was God who changed his name. He didn't change his own name in the wrestling. He didn't overcome the angel of the Lord. I think that we all understand that if an angel were to come here and wanted to throw us to the ground, we would be thrown to the ground. This was an exercise that God had for Jacob so that he could recognize he needed a change. He was a deceiver, and here he was. Now he had a family, and he was going back to his brother and facing these things that he had done as a young man. And God met with him and changed him and gave him a new name. What is our name? Have we met with God? Have we allowed him to speak to our hearts? The thing about wrestling with God is that Jacob was engaged in this. Have we ever been engaged with God in a way where he can say, what about this in your life? What about that in your life? And ultimately, what is your name? What are you? What am I? Deep within. What is your name? If you're honest deep within and you let God speak to you, what would your name be? And then what would you want it to be? Here's my point, I think, and I have to wrap this up quickly. Until we come to this place where we allow God to say, this is who you are, this is what you are, clear deep down within your heart, and it's been an influence in your whole life. And maybe you, like Jacob, have already met God and had an interaction with God as at Bethel, but now we're coming to a place where God's saying, I really, really, really want to deal with things deep, deep within you. Because even though you've trusted me and you have named yourself a Christian and had an experience with God, there's something more. And I want to bring you to a point where you clear down in your spirit, allow me, that's God, to change you. Jacob didn't change his name. God did it. Jacob didn't change who Jacob was. God did it. Jacob didn't even have the strength to wrestle with the angel of the Lord, except that God allowed it. But Jacob did have to answer the question, who are you? Are you willing to recognize the problem that's deep, deep within you that has been a factor in your whole life? And allow me to change your character, to change who you are. I want us to stand together, if you will. And if you're able, would it be all right? I'm